I walked into the living room, the familiar creak of the hardwood floor beneath my feet amplifying the heaviness pressing against my chest. Conflicting emotions swirled inside me: love, guilt, longing, and an unshakable sense of disconnection. Brian was sprawled across our faded gray couch. His broad shoulders slouched as he scrolled through his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. He was browsing travel packages for a romantic resort getaway. White sandy beaches, turquoise waters, and candlelit dinners under the stars. It was the kind of trip we dreamed about years ago, back when our love felt invincible. His hazel eyes flickered with a fragile hope, a quiet excitement that made my stomach twist painfully. He didn't notice me at first, too absorbed in visions of a future I wasn't sure I could share anymore. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, caught between a man I'd once promised forever to and the turmoil churning inside me. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, unable to bridge the gap between our past and the murky future stretching out ahead. I took a deep breath, the air catching in my throat as I wrestled with the words I'd been rehearsing for weeks. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched the edge of my sweater, grounding myself. "Brian," I said, my voice softer than I intended, "I need space. I feel so lonely, even when I'm with you, and I can't think straight anymore. I'm going to my parents' cabin for 2 weeks to sort out my feelings." The words hung heavy in the air, sharp and final. I watched his face shift, the hope in his eyes dimming like a candle snuffed out by a sudden gust of wind. His jaw tightened and his hand stilled on the keyboard. The silence between us stretched, thick with unspoken questions, until he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is there someone else?" The vulnerability in his tone pierced me, and I shook my head quickly, perhaps too quickly. "No, Brian, there's no one else," I said firmly, meeting his gaze with as much conviction as I could muster. But the truth was a tangled mess I couldn't unravel. Not for him, not even for myself. Packing my things felt surreal. I moved through our home like a ghost, my fingers brushing over familiar textures of our shared life. The framed photo of us laughing at the county fair sat on the dresser, my wide grin pressed against his cheek as cotton candy stained our fingertips. The quilt his mother had sewn for our first anniversary draped over the armchair, its intricate patterns a testament to the years we'd woven together. Even the faint scent of garlic and rosemary lingered in the air, a remnant of the pasta dinners we used to cook side by side. Each item was a thread in the tapestry of us, and leaving it behind felt like ripping my soul apart piece by piece. Brian stood in the doorway of our bedroom, his arms crossed, his eyes distant as he watched me fold clothes into my suitcase. I could feel his gaze, heavy with unspoken words, and it took everything in me not to turn around and collapse into his arms, to pretend everything was fine. When I finally drove away, the rear-view mirror framed our little house growing smaller, its warm yellow paint fading into the dusk. The cabin was a 3-hour drive, nestled deep in the woods by a quiet lake, a place I'd always found solace in as a child. But as I unpacked my bags in the rustic bedroom, Brian's presence seemed to follow me. The stillness of the cabin amplified my thoughts of him. The way he'd looked at me with that flicker of hope, the romantic getaway he'd been planning with such care. I could almost hear his voice, soft and earnest, promising me the world. A part of me clung to a fragile hope that this separation might reignite what we'd lost, that time apart could mend the fractures I'd let grow between us. But doubt gnawed at me, whispering questions I couldn't silence. Was I being honest with myself? Was I really alone here? Or had I already crossed a line I couldn't come back from? Meanwhile, back at home, Brian wasn't coping as well as I'd hoped. I didn't know it then, but he couldn't shake the unease my departure had left behind. He sat on the couch that night, the laptop still open to the resort website, but his mind was elsewhere. He told me later that my words, "I need space," echoed in his head, each syllable laced with suspicion he couldn't dismiss. He grabbed his phone and started scrolling through my mom's Facebook page, his heart pounding as he searched for proof I was where I said I'd be. When he found a photo she'd posted that morning, me standing on the cabin porch, a mug of coffee in my hands, the lake shimmering in the background, he exhaled a shaky breath. For a moment, he felt relief wash over him, a reassurance that I hadn't lied. But the calm didn't last. A name kept surfacing in his thoughts, One he couldn't ignore. Andrew. Andrew was a shadow from my past. A college boyfriend I'd dated before Brian and I met. We'd parted ways amicably, or so I thought. And I hadn't spoken to him in years until a chance encounter at a coffee shop 3 months ago. He'd been charming, familiar, and dangerously easy to talk to. One coffee turned into a lunch, then a late-night phone call, and before I knew it, I was confiding in him about the loneliness I felt in my marriage. I'd told myself it was innocent, a friendship rekindled at a time when I needed someone to listen. But deep down, I knew I was treading dangerous waters. Brian had never met Andrew, but he'd heard the name in passing. Casual mentions I'd brushed off as nostalgia. Now, that name loomed larger in his mind, a specter he couldn't shake. The next morning, driven by a mix of desperation and paranoia, he did something he'd never imagined. He hired a private detective to follow me. I was oblivious to all of this as I settled into the cabin. The first few days were quiet, introspective. I walked along the lake's edge, the cold water lapping at my boots, and tried to untangle my feelings. I missed Brian, the way he'd hum off-key while cooking breakfast, the warmth of his hand in mine during late-night walks. But I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward Andrew, the thrill of his attention after months of feeling invisible. On the 4th day, I texted him, "I'm at the cabin. It's peaceful here. Want to join me for a day?" He replied within minutes, "On my way." When he arrived, his easy smile and familiar laugh melted my reservations. We spent the day talking, then the evening drinking wine by the fireplace. One thing led to another, and soon we were tangled in the sheets, the line I'd sworn I wouldn't cross erased in a haze of longing and recklessness. Back home, Brian waited in agony for the detective's report. It arrived on the 7th day. A slim envelope slid under his door, containing photos and a short video. I can only imagine the way his hands shook as he opened it, the way his breath caught when he saw me laughing with Andrew on the cabin porch. Our bodies too close, our smiles too intimate. The video was worse. Grainy footage of us kissing by the lake, my arms around Andrew's neck, his hands on my waist. Brian told me later that it felt like a dagger twisting in his chest, each image slicing through the trust we'd built over years. His world collapsed in that moment, and he reacted the only way he knew how. He drove to the bank and withdrew every cent from our joint savings, $42,000, money we'd saved for a house, a family, a future. Then he called a locksmith and changed every lock on our home, barring me from the life we'd shared. When I returned 2 weeks later, the cabin affair already a bittersweet memory, I found my key useless in the front door. My heart sank as I peered through the window, seeing the divorce papers neatly stacked on the kitchen table. My phone rang and Brian's voice came through, steady but laced with a pain I'd never heard before. "I know about Andrew," he said. "The detective showed me everything. Photos, videos, the whole damn story. You need space, Rachel. You needed him, and you broke us." He detailed every moment of my betrayal, his words cutting deeper with each sentence. I tried to respond, to explain, but my voice trembled, and the excuses I'd rehearsed fell apart. I was speechless, standing on the porch of a home that no longer welcomed me. As he spoke, I heard something shift in him, a resolve I hadn't expected. "I found freedom while you were gone," he said. "Not the kind you chase with him, but real freedom. I'm done living in your lies." He hung up, and I sank to the steps, the weight of my choices crashing down. Brian was right. I destroyed everything. In the days that followed, I rented a cheap motel room and replayed our last conversation, his words echoing in my mind. Desperate for answers, I drove back to cabin one last time, hoping to confront Andrew, to make sense of what I'd done. But when I arrived, I saw him through the window, his arms around another woman, their laughter spilling into the night. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I'd been nothing more than a fleeting distraction to him, just as I had made Brian a casualty of my selfishness. I drove away, tears blurring the road ahead, my heart heavy with regret and shame. I'd lost Brian, the love of my life, for a fantasy that crumbled at the first test. Sitting alone in the silence, I began to understand a painful truth. True freedom isn't running from responsibility. It's facing it. I'd chased a lie, and it cost me everything. Now, with nothing left but the wreckage of my choices, I knew the road to redemption would be long and lonely, but it was mine to walk, a daunting journey toward a self I barely recognized anymore.